Hi everyone. Now I'm going to comment upon the second excellent paper in this list. And this is by Dr. Angela G. LaValley, and her paper is entitled Attachment, Relational Maintenance, and Satisfaction in Relationships Between Parents and Adult Children, an exploratory analysis of the maintenance gap. This piece also has so much to love and some nice overlap with the previous piece. So Dr. LaValley really takes us through understanding why this framework is ideal at this really prominent, kind of tricky time of transitioning from being a young adult, most of the time living at home with family, into college years, where even if we're not living away from home, but most of them are, we are living at home, things are shifting, and autonomy is enhanced to a level even above that happens at adolescence. So it's a really great introduction, and she mentions that romantic relationships have played a role in the attachment that's occurring right now among those emerging adults, and that this was formed by the parents, who may even be the parents who are assessed here. Attachments formed with them, and then it shifts with the romantic relationships that have occurred thus far. So I think that's really important. It's something that you might all want to talk about in this chat room too, how that plays out, and tapping into some Laporte's findings and things like that. Another great thing about this piece is that she not only addresses the relational maintenance literature, which is vast, really appropriately given the things that she's assessing herein, she also makes that important update about the mediated communication, which becomes really interesting when you get into her results. As in Dr. Rubinsky's paper, Dr. LaValley really nicely addresses that it's not just about how much we enact or receive these important behaviors, particular support, but also avoidance, working through mediated channels, etc. It's the gap between what we need/desire, even to draw from the CTI language from before, who we are as a person, or who we are as a dyad. It's the gap between those things that is probably playing the most integral role in how that affects our relationships, our well-being, etc. So that's really neat, and really a great thing for us to begin diving into as relationship scholars. So a great point about the methods here, it is really tricky to decide how college students should pick a parent to assess in papers like this, but I think sometimes the best route is the simplest one, or the most straightforward one, of allowing them to select that parent, because they're going to think of one that plays a prominent role in their lives. And then unsurprisingly, we see that the demographics work out, that they're picking their mothers most commonly, and then going down the line, just like we see in the attachment literature, which theoretically comes from moms, starts delving with the mother-child relationship, but is not just about moms, of course, and realms of closeness, etc., etc. So that was really well done. Now the results are still a lot of really interesting things coming up here, but I think it's pretty fascinating that attachment and the relational maintenance, these were not correlated, the desired and the enacted. So I thought that was really, really interesting, that her first research question, or her first assumption, was not significant. So that was fascinating to me. A side note, this is why I was distracted for a minute. I get distracted by the descriptives because they're so delicious in pieces and sometimes get overlooked, in this piece in particular. So in the table, the means, when you look at the mean scores for the attachment styles, which she wisely assessed as continuous scales for each of those categories, you see that they don't really map out with attachment frequencies that we most see commonly reported when essentially people are placed into one style or another. So a lot of the times in my family comm class, for instance, we talk about how over 60% of people, 60 is probably a modest amount, of young children develop a secure attachment style. But then when we move forward in the literature, which again makes me think of those romantic relationships too, things get complex, things get messy. So I thought that was really delicious, descriptive, and also helps to better navigate the results. Another thing to point out, another great part of this piece, the support never stops being important. That the support regression held up gives great legitimacy to this long-held claim about the importance of support across the lifetime and across life stages, even in parent-child relationships, or especially perhaps parent-child relationships. I would love, as you have a chance to discuss online. I would love some discussion about this linear versus curvilinear explanation, these trends that maybe also underline the processes seen here in this piece. She brilliantly elaborates on this in the final section of the paper, nice and tightly, and I think there's a lot more room to talk about that. And finally, before I leave this great piece, I want to just say that Dr. LaValley gives great tips on how these findings translate into the lives of emerging adults. She may not call them tips, but she's giving them here for sure. She describes a kind of Goldilocks effect in which there can be too much or too little of even something as wonderful as support. And I wonder if an underlining issue here is the meta-communication that emerging adults and their parents are having, the quality of that meta-communication, or maybe are they having it at all? This is a transition that there are not lots of how-tos out there how to navigate it, and there's not a one-size-fits-all as adult children are growing, and particularly as developmental scholars are telling us that today's college students are much more like adolescents and like the 15, 16-year-olds that we've seen years before, that life stage is holding off a little bit longer. And so there are a lot of question marks about what is appropriate, what is desired, and sometimes maybe in the relationships ourselves we're not sure until we're in it and we see that something doesn't feel right or is off. Well, how much are parents and children talking about that? And furthermore, how much might one's attachment style influence that meta-communication or lack thereof? Just things for us to think about in this really important relationship, this really important life stage that, of course, for us, this is these are the students that are in our classrooms. These are the experiences that they're living through, and what a great piece, what a great clean take at so many important realms of the comm literature. Well done.